Podcast giant Joe Rogan hosted Tesla CEO and owner of Twitter Elon Musk on the Joe Rogan Experience. Now, in the latest episode published yesterday, both of them alluded to leftists being the downfall of society. Watch.
I don't want to be melodramatic, but it's almost like a death cult.
It's a death cult. No, that is exactly right. It's essentially the extinctionists. Like, it's in the limit. It is that they're propagating the extinction of humanity and civilization. And there's some people who are like most of the time it's implicit. They don't but sometimes it's explicit. Like there was a guy on the front page of the New York Times who literally has the thing called the extinctionist movement, and he was quoted on the front page of the New York Times as saying, "There are 8 billion people in the world, but it would be better if there were none."
Before diving into the doom and gloom faction of citizens bringing down civilization, Rogan pressed Musk on the reason behind the purchase of Twitter, now called X. Let's take a look.
This is going to sound somewhat melodramatic, but I was worried about that it was having a corrosive effect on civilization. That it was just having a bad impact. And I think part of it is that it's where it was located, which is downtown San Francisco. And while I think San Francisco is a beautiful city, and we should really fight hard to kind of right the ship of San Francisco, if you've walked around downtown San Francisco, right near the FK Twitter headquarters, it's a zombie apocalypse.
So what do you make of this? Are the leftists part of a death cult? Robby, help me understand the argument here.
I fear for my life every time I sit in this close proximity to my favorite leftist. Look, I think, so he talked about the human extinction movement, the voluntary human extinction movement, which I think is a very ridiculous
fringe
concept.
Movement that leftists, like Bernie-style leftists, object to enormously because it's anti-humanistic.
Really
no one cares about
These
that.
people are total kooks. And in general, the kind of population bomb, population control people are totally discredited and kooky. I don't know that they actually have that much influence on leftist discourse or really discourse at all.
A lot of conservatives like them because if you...
No, they don't.
Yeah, they're not like actual conservatives, but it's a fringe group that has very little people who like it, period. But it appeals to some, frankly, like people in the energy sector and the like, because you don't have to do Green New Deal. You don't have to bring down human consumption as much if you actually just bring down the population. And so there are some like pinker types who talk about how the world has gotten better through technology. We should be talking about how many people have been brought out of poverty by technology.
Yeah, that's what Elon was talking about. That's the good. That's the
no, but
a
lot of them are like, well, we should focus on the industrialization of the global South, put limits on that as opposed to limits on us. We've already gone through our industrial revolution. We're already on the other side. And the real problem isn't us. It's some factory in China. There's a lot of focus on China and the global South when talking about pollution, because that means that Chevron and Exxon and whomever don't have to actually cap their output. So there's
right, but that's all liberal. I mean, the
it.
conservatives are saying, yes, point to all the polluting. They're pointing to all the polluting going on elsewhere as a reason to overly fret about controlling our own level of pollution. Not saying we should control our human beings.
What's 1 more million metric tons?
In any case,
that's not a death cult. Wanting to cause climate change that results in mass drought and starvation.
We should take reasonable
is not a death
efforts to curb the worst potential ramifications of climate change. I don't think Elon Musk disagrees with that.
You know what that means, though, right?
What?
You know what avoiding the worst potential outcomes of climate change means, right?
Nuclear energy.
Sure, I don't have a problem with nuclear energy, but more specifically, it means something on the scale of a Green New Deal. That's what the whole point of a Green New Deal is. To prevent us getting to the, 2 degrees Celsius change, that would be the tipping point for what scientists expect would be the worst of these changes. Climate change activists aren't sitting here saying, I just don't want it to be hotter next August. The goals that they've been articulating for the world are goals that are very much geared toward. We've already crossed.
I don't know specifically what is in the latest version of the Green New Deal, but what we don't want to do is hamstring, hold back technological innovation, because by letting innovation flourish, we get cleaner and better sources of energy.
Innovation?
We want to move from, what does Schellenberger say? I forget the exact order. From
What
fossil
technical-
fuels to gas to renewables to nuclear.
What technical innovation would be held back by, what specific technical innovation are you worried about being held back by the Green New Deal? Because I wouldn't say
I don't know specifically
opening
what's
up
in it,
more
but-
drilling in the Arctic is a technical innovation. That's just more exploitation of a resource that people have been pulling out of the ground for hundreds
Right.
of
We
years.
don't want to deprive people of resources in order to stop climate change, because depriving people of resources is the anti-human thing.
What is depriving people of resources?
Well,
Like
just
what?
just making it harder for people to have gas in the cars, or or doing less drilling, or less providing of that resource to make it more expensive, is exactly the kind of anti-human thing that Elon's talking there.
Okay.
Now, if we find better. Now, if we can invent and find better ways.
Anti-human.
I mean, Elon is inventing self-driving cars and trying to make that a thing. I think he should do it without the subsidies, personally. But
I think it's anti-human for almost 7 million people to die annually from air pollution alone. I think it's anti-human for Chevron to have gotten away with poisoning entire communities in the Amazon, who are born with multiple generations of birth defects because of how much oil Chevron left in one of the most important regions for biodiversity on the planet. I think it's anti-human to have climate change that causes droughts and mass immigration. Immigration, the likes of these folks, don't really care much for, but it's going to happen because you can't expect people who don't have water and don't have food.
I mean, again, I want to talk about solutions to curb those problems.
Wait a minute. But what are the solutions for you to curb?
Well, you tell me, and I'll evaluate it.
Green New Deal, for instance.
Well, what is that? That's
Stopping
just
climate change. Like that is the entire point. A real investment in moving away from dirty energy. That's the whole point of all of this.
We agree to do that.
If you want
Nuclear.
to talk about being people forward and humanistic, I want to live in a world where instead of mothers coming home from the hospital with a 5-digit hospital bill, where we incentivize people to have families by sending them home with what they do in the Scandinavian and European countries, baby boxes, a box that has sheets and a cushion in it where the baby can literally sleep in the box.
This has nothing to do with the environment, though.
I'm sorry, Robby, this is a broader segment about what it means. There was a pretty significant charge leveraged against the left of being anti-human, and I'm explaining why I feel kind of frustrated by that framing. It's the left that's saying they want to support mothers, they want to support families, they want to get people to have a living wage so they can stay home and actually raise their children without leaving them to delinquency and causing some of the problems that he's describing in San Francisco. I want us to have an understanding of why it is that when a city like San Francisco gets such a concentration of extremely wealthy people and drives up housing costs, that of course is going to have an anti-humanistic effect on the majority of the bulk of a population who can no longer afford.
Well, the housing costs are being driven up because it's impossible to build new housing. I'm not specifically blaming the left for that.
It's not just that, Robby.
It is substantially that. We've made it impossible to build anything in this country because of
Robby, every answer doesn't have one solution, every little tiny square libertarian peg hole.
It's
where
literally
it's always
illegal to build housing.
Look, I'm happy to build all the houses in the world, but the difference between San Francisco 50 years ago and San Francisco today, with the same restrictive housing and building policies, is that they
compound over time. If you have 50 years of it being illegal to build housing, then the problem's worse.
I really want to have this conversation, but I get accused a lot on this show of interrupting you. I'm just trying to finish a couple of points here. The difference here, you cannot ignore that the way that wealth aggregates is not a zero-sum game. And when you look at cities like San Francisco, where the income disparity has grown disproportionately, of course that is driving the homeless crisis and the addiction crisis you're seeing there on the ground. And I don't think it's the left that are advocating for a minimum wage, advocating for housing for all, advocating for Medicare for all, advocating for medical debt cancellation. The $80 billion that they want to cut from the IRS, well, so to fund these wars overseas, it would only take $80 billion to cancel all medical debt in the country. So it does strike me as somewhat rich for people who are leaning more to the right. And I wouldn't even necessarily characterize Rogan as that, because he was the one who supported Bernie Sanders in 2020. But people who are increasingly aligning themselves with folks like Ron DeSantis and the like, who advocate for nothing to support the life of American citizens as being a death cult.
So why do you think then that Joe Rogan, who, as you pointed out, was a Bernie Sanders supporter and was maybe someone broadly sympathetic to aspects of the left and probably still is, nodding in agreement that it's a death cult.
I don't know. It's interesting. I would like to see him have some leftists on, maybe even have Bernie Sanders back on and have a conversation about this heel turn, because he was someone who was very passionate about, specifically, if I recall correctly, the issue of Medicare for all. And I hate to break it to you, but 68,000 people haven't stopped dying every year in the richest country in the world because they can't afford health care. We don't have dental care as part of our overall health care. And with the connection between oral health and heart disease, it's unconscionable, with heart disease being one of the leading causes of death. You really do have infant mortality rates in parts of this country that rival infant mortality rates in the global south. And we know that we could do things differently, and instead we're spending trillions of dollars over the course of the last couple of decades on wars that have had the result of doing
I don't want to spend any money on that. I think when the Elon, the futurist camp is talking, but there was over the course of the last century, a massive, massive improvement in living conditions and life expectancy and health, and a wholesale reduction of poverty in the global south, in South America, in India, in China, because of better farming practices and technological innovation. And we don't want to kneecap those things further, because that is the most likely to further alleviate and improve the state of the earth. It's most likely to be those things.
That. I just don't understand what that argument is.
Well, then we're arguing with a straw man. We just don't want to prevent any of that.
The question is, are any of these people going to advocate not just to cut funding to going elsewhere, but to actually want to fund a country that supports life and happiness for American citizens? Do we want to acknowledge that productivity is up? Americans are working harder and longer than they have done historically, while getting worse off. You pointed to rising health expectancies across the world. It's the opposite trajectory for white men living in America today. And our generation was the first in American history to do worse financially than our parents' generation. That's our reality. And part of when you're looking at folks in the polls, looking at Biden, scoffing at the idea that the economy is good, is because they're living that reality. So I just would like to see some of these folks saying that the left is a death cult. The left is the only one who's coming up with any kind of ideas and prescriptions, not for just how to cut funding, but how to help Americans who are getting a smaller and smaller piece of the pie despite working harder and harder, to actually come up with affirmative solutions instead of just casting aspersions on the other team all day.
I would take the position that mindlessly growing federal bureaucracy or local bureaucracies are a death cult. I wouldn't say the left is a death cult.
All right, Roger.
Just because I like you too much, Briahna.
And I think that a libertarian dog-eat-dog world is going to advantage people who are billionaires like Elon Musk and multimillionaires like Joe Rogan. They can build their fortresses around themselves and protect themselves. But what's going to happen to everybody else?
I mean, their living standards will drastically and dramatically improve when we generally leave human beings alone to organize their societies as they see fit and innovate better ways to grow food and build houses and use energy. And that is the story of the last century. And it's been the best time ever to be a human being in existence.
Let us know in the comments if you're feeling that way in your lives, if you feel like it's the best time ever to be a human being in existence.
Well, tomorrow on Rising, we'll be right back here at the desk, same time, same place.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. For those of you who prefer to listen while you're on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.